Okay guys, welcome to Module 7. This is Lesson 13, Correcting Errors. So of course in this lesson we're going to be talking a lot about how we should correct our students. But please keep in mind that these are all theories, these are ideas of how to correct students, and you should choose the strategy that's best for you and the method that's best for you. But that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be talking about lots of different ways to correct students. So let's take a look at our aims first, guys. Our first aim of today's lesson is that we're going to take a look at 3 different methods of correcting students. Then we're going to discuss the pros and the cons of each method and discuss which one is generally best. Moving into our second aim of today's lesson, we're going to be talking about how we should correct different kinds of students. Because of course in every class you're going to have some strong students, some weak students, some shy students, and some bad students, right? Okay, so that's what we'll discuss in the second aim of today's class. Our third aim of today's class, we're actually going to be doing 2 different things. The first thing we're going to be doing is briefly discussing how gestures and body language can help us to help our students correct themselves. And the last thing we'll be doing today is we'll be taking a look at how to correct written work, which can be quite painful sometimes for the teacher. Trust me, I know I've corrected a lot of written work in my time, right? Okay guys, so that's what we'll be doing today. I'm gonna see you guys back in activity 1. Okay guys, so in activity 1, like you got in your guys' books there, you guys can see that it says these are 3 different teachers' approaches to error correction, right? So we're going to take a look at 3 different methods, approaches, or strategies that these different teachers have for correcting their students' errors, right? So we got 3 teachers, A, B, C. Let's take a look at teacher A first. Now, teacher A said, "I never let my students make mistakes. If they say anything wrong, I stop them and make them say it correctly. I don't want them to learn bad English from each other." Okay, now I want you guys to actually think about that strategy. He or she never lets their students make mistakes. If they say anything wrong, they're gonna correct them and make them say it correctly. And the teacher said, "I don't want them to learn bad English from each other." Okay, so I want you to honestly think at home, is this the kind of teacher that you want to learn from? And also, is this the kind of teacher that you think is best? Is this the kind of teacher that you want to be when it comes to correcting errors, right? Now, a lot of times when I ask this question in class, a lot of the students describe this teacher's method as being strict. However, there are some students that genuinely like this kind of approach, right? And maybe you do too. But is this the best approach for everybody? So yeah, think about it. Okay guys, we're gonna take a look at teacher B and teacher B's method, right? So teacher B said, "I correct students sometimes, but not all the time. If we're practicing one particular language point, then I insist that they say it correctly. But if we're doing a freer activity, then I try not to correct too much. If I do correct students, I try to do it in an encouraging way." Okay, so teacher B sounds fairly well balanced, right? If the students are practicing one particular point, the teacher will insist, right? It'll be a little bit pushy, try to correct their English and get them to say it the correct way. However, if they're doing a freer activity, teacher B is going to be much more easygoing, much more lenient, right? And they're going to give their students an easier time. The other thing that teacher B says that's really, really important here is that he or she said, "I try to correct them in an encouraging way," right? So that probably means that teacher B is praising his students first, showing them the mistake, giving them another chance, and having them repeat themselves, and once they do it correctly, lots of praise, right? "Yeah, you could do it." All right, so I want you guys to think, like, how does that sound to you? Again, really truly think about it. If you're a learner, if you're a student, would you like this kind of teacher? Do you think this is the best way to correct students? And also, if you're going to be a teacher, is this the kind of teacher that you want to be? Okay, but let's take a look at teacher C, because teacher C, of course, is quite different from A and B. So teacher C said, I try to correct my students as little as possible. I want my students to express themselves in English without worrying too much about making mistakes. Sometimes I notice points that everyone gets wrong and I deal with them later. But I never interrupt my students to correct them. Okay, so in comparison to teacher A and teacher B, teacher C sounds quite easygoing, right? Fairly lenient. He or she never wants to correct their students. So again, truly think about it. Is this the kind of teacher you want to learn from? Is this the kind of teacher that you think their method is the best? And is this the kind of teacher that you want to be? Now, we're going to talk more about these teachers in much more detail, guys. What we're going to do in the next part is we're going to talk about the pros and the cons of each approach. And then I think we're going to make a conclusion about which teacher's method is generally best for most students. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break and I'll be back in a bit. Okay guys, so let's take a deeper look into these strategies here. So I've got written on the board here pros and cons. And by now you guys should know that pros and cons means advantages and disadvantages. So let's take a look at teacher A's method in more detail first. Now, just to quickly recap what teacher A said. They said, I never let my students make mistakes. If they say anything wrong, I stop them, I correct them, and I make them say it correctly. I don't want them to learn bad English from each other. Now, the first thing we should say is that teacher A does sound pretty passionate, right? And sounds pretty passionate about using correct English. But what are the pros and the cons of this kind of method? Now, probably the first thing you're thinking right now is like, wow, the guy sounds pretty strict. Okay, true. But one of the things we could write down as a pro is that students will get good practice in using the correct form and learning the correct form. So we should write down here that one of the pros, of course, is that students will learn the correct form. And also, like I just said, they'll also get good practice when it comes to the correct form. Okay, so those are things that are quite good. And like seriously, I'm sure a lot of you guys watching right now, you might like this method, right? And I think this method can be good. However, there are some major problems with this too. And we're going to come back to pros later. There might be more than just these two pros. But I really want to focus on the cons. Now, think about it. If you're correcting every mistake, you know, maybe you ask your class like, hey guys, what time do you get up? And somebody says, I get up at 7. And you're like, wrong. Not I am get up at the 7. I get up at 7. Oh, I get up at 7. Oh, right? And you feel so bad, right? But maybe if you're a strict teacher, yeah, maybe you don't care too much. Anyhow, guys, but if you're doing that all the time, what is that gonna do? That's gonna make some students scared to speak up, right? Students are gonna be less and less willing to volunteer an answer because they're so scared of making a mistake. And I think that's really bad, right? We want to encourage our students to ask questions and to answer questions, right? We don't want to make them scared. So I think that's one of the major cons though, is that using this method, you're probably gonna freak out and scare a significant portion of your students. So let's write that down on the board. We're gonna say some because it's not gonna be all students, right? But some students might get really, really, really nervous. And I'm sure you guys must have had this kind of teacher in the past, right? Maybe not for English, but maybe you had a math teacher or a history teacher or whatever kind of teacher who was really, really strict, when it came to correcting errors, right? Was that a good thing for you? Maybe it was. Was it a good thing for everybody? Yeah, I don't know. Anyhow, let's focus on some other cons that this method contains. Alright, so we got some students might get really nervous. But also imagine if you are correcting every single mistake, what else is going to happen, right? Maybe you're practicing a particular language point and a lot of your students are making mistakes, right? And you're correcting all of those mistakes. What is that going to do, right?